So Jake Paul beats Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. in a 10-round unanimous decision, and suddenly he's ranked top 14 in the WBA cruiserweight division, and just like clockwork, the internet loses its mind because that's what always happens when Jake Paul does anything remotely successful in boxing, and of course, everyone starts crying fraud, scam, rig, cherry-pick, opponent, weak division, it's not real boxing, he doesn't deserve a ranking, he's a YouTuber with gloves and nothing more. And they completely tear down the Chavez Jr. when saying he was a poor opponent, bad matchmaking, Jake's a coward, blah blah blah, the usual hate parade from the boxing purists and the casuals who can't stand that Jake is still here, still winning, still relevant, and now recognized on paper. But while all that was happening, I was watching a video from True Jordy breaking down the fight, and he said something interesting, something that echoes what a lot of people have been saying for years now, especially every time Jake Paul does anything in this sport, they start bringing up the name Viddal Riley, and the comparisons between Jake and Viddal start flying. And of course, if you know anything about the YouTube boxing scene or British boxing, you know that Viddal's name has been floating next to Jake's for a long time, since the early influencer boxing days when Viddal was training Digi and KSI back in 2018 and 2019, and that whole rivalry between KSI and Jake kept the name Viddal hovering in the background like an inevitable what if. And now fast forward to 2025, Viddal is a legitimate British cruiserweight champion, just coming off a win over Chef Clark on the Eubank Ben undercard, and Jake just cracked the WBA top 15, and True Jordy said Jake's not interested in taking the sport seriously like Viddal, he's chasing money, not legacy. And look, I get it, Jordy's friends with Viddal, so you expect that kind of loyalty, but it got me thinking because that line of argument is everywhere now and no one really questions it. But is Viddal really on a whole different path, or is he just doing the same thing Jake's doing, but with a different coat of paint and less scrutiny? Because here's the thing, everyone loves to put Viddal on a pedestal as the prototype of what a boxer should be, and they trash Jake for being the exact opposite. They say Jake's fights are meaningless, he's ducking real competition, he's picking old guys like guys, MMA guys, inactive guys, and yes, all of those things have elements of truth, but when you actually start comparing the records and looking at the actual opponents both of them fought, especially in their early pro careers, the line gets real blurry real fast, and honestly, the only thing separating Jake and Viddal in people's minds is optics and perception, because if you strip all that away and just look at the facts, you'll realize something uncomfortable. Viddal Riley has also done everything people accused Jake Paul of doing. Let's start at the beginning. Viddal made his pro debut in 2018 against Julio Emmanuel Gonzalez, who was 0-1, nothing unusual, their typical soft launch for a new pro, and nobody batted an eye because that's how the sport works. Every boxer's early career is filled with easy fights to build confidence and experience. It's not a knock on Viddal, it's just the truth of the business. But then his second fight was against Mitchell Spangler, and if you haven't seen that fight, go find it, because I swear to you that might be the most one-sided mismatch I've ever seen. The guy didn't even look like he'd stepped into a boxing gym before, and it wasn't just that Viddal outclassed him, it looked like Viddal was fighting someone who didn't even understand the rules, like it was some random off the street in boxing shorts. And this is a guy Viddal fought after spending over a decade training boxing as an amateur, who apparently beat Daniel Dubois and sparred with Dillian White, and yet he's out here demolishing a guy who couldn't throw a jab straight. And again, nobody called it out, nobody raised any red flags, it was just, hey, look at Viddal go, future world champ. Meanwhile, Jake fights Nate Robinson, who yes was a basketball player and no didn't have a boxing background, but at that point Jake himself had only fought Digi and Anasong Jib and had maybe 2 years of training under his belt. But when he knocked Nate out, suddenly it was a scandal, suddenly Jake was evil for picking on an untrained opponent, suddenly it was a disgrace to the sport. But when Viddal beat up Mitchell Spangler, who made his pro debut that night and hasn't fought since, everyone said great performance mate and moved on like it was nothing, and you see that's where the double standard starts. Jake gets crucified for doing what literally every boxer does, including Viddal, who again is meant to be the serious one, the pure one, the real boxer doing things the right way, except he also fought guys with losing records. He also fought inactive fighters. He also beat up people with no chance of winning. It's the same formula, just different branding. Let's go even further. Look at Viddal's 6th pro fight against a guy named Joan Volau or Valo, who hadn't won A fight since 2017 had been knocked out 4 times before fighting Viddal and then got knocked out again in round 1 that night. Does that sound like real competition, or does that sound like a safe matchmaking call designed to boost the record? And the highlight reel, just like Jake's fights with Ryan Berland or Andre August, both of whom were journeymen, yes, and both were inactive, but so was Joan Vallo, and nobody batted an eye because Viddal is seen as a legit boxer and Jake is seen as an intruder, so everyone's okay with Viddal padding his record, but outraged when Jake does the same thing despite Jake having far less experience and no amateur background. Like, how does that make sense? Jake's been in the sport for 5 years. Max, no Olympic team, no national tournament, just training camps and influencer beef, and he's held to a higher standard than Viddal, who's been boxing since he was a kid and beat top UK amateurs and has a pedigree like that's wild when you think about it. And then there's the age argument. Everyone loves bringing up Jake's opponent's ages. Mike Tyson was 58, Anderson Silva was 47, Tyron Woodley was 40, and yeah, those ages are old by boxing standards. But let's talk context. Mike Tyson was an exhibition and a cash grab. Nobody called that a competitive bout, so that's off the table. Silva was old but still active and gave Jake a real fight. Woodley was 40 but had just fought for a UFC title 2 years prior and still had cardio and reflexes. And by the way, both Silva and Woodley gave Jake competitive fights. Jake didn't walk through them. Silva won rounds, Woodley dropped him and nearly knocked him out, and it took grit and adjustments for Jake to win those fights. But now let's look at Viddal again. Few months before the Chef Clark fight, he fought Dan Garber, who was 39 years old, and nobody complained. People said, oh, well, late replacement, 3 weeks notice. He was the only option really, because when Jake fought Tyron Woodley on 2 weeks notice, people said he ducked real fighters and handpicked a 40-year-old, but Viddal fights a 39-year-old on late notice, and it's all good. Like, come on now, you can't have it both ways if we're analyzing Jake's matchmaking with a microscope. Let's do the same for Viddal, and what we'll find is that Viddal's fought guys older than Jake's opponents. He's fought guys with worse records and less recent success, and he's fought guys who've been knocked out more times than Jake's opponents, and yet somehow he gets praised for development and Jake gets slammed for cowardice. That's the hypocrisy. And what makes it worse is that Viddal's doing this with 20 plus years of experience boxing at a high level, whereas Jake's doing it with 5 years and no amateur fights, and yet Jake's been in more competitive fights, got cut, took damage, had to dig deep, go the distance, get off the canvas, learn on the fly, and still gets no credit, while Viddal coasts through soft touches without breaking a sweat and gets hailed as a standard. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Jake is better than Viddal or would be Viddal. That's not the argument here. The argument is about fairness, consistency, and double standards. If you're gonna bash Jake for cherry picking, then call out Viddal too. If you're gonna say Jake's opponents are old and unworthy, then talk about Garber and Vallo and Spangler. If you're gonna say Jake's not serious because he talks about belts while fighting non-champions, then let's not forget Viddal also said he wanted to be world champ while knocking out total beginners. So if it's not okay for Jake, it's not okay for Viddal either. But no one wants to talk about that, and I get it. It's easier to hate Jake Paul than to admit he's doing things by the book because it messes with the narrative we want to believe. We want to believe Jake's a clown and Viddal's a savior. But the truth is both are playing the same game, they're just wearing different jerseys, and honestly Jake has the harder job because he has to sell pay-per-views, deal with constant media backlash, fight under a global spotlight, and get judged by people who know nothing about boxing but feel entitled to an opinion because of his name. And yeah, he's brash and cocky and a showman, but so was Floyd Mayweather, so was Ollie. The sport has always had loud personalities, and Jake is no different. The difference is the world doesn't want him to succeed, and that's why everyone gets dissected, every ranking is ridiculed, and every opponent is labeled a bum regardless of the context. And meanwhile, Viddal coasts along with applause for doing the exact same things, and that's why this whole comparison needs to be looked at with clear eyes. No bias, no tribalism, just honesty, because if we're being honest, Jake's not doing anything unusual. He's doing what every boxer does early on: find winnable fights. Build a record, develop skills, increase marketability, and eventually test yourself when the time is right. And Viddal did the same exact thing. So why is Jake vilified for following the formula when everyone else gets a pass? It's because of who he is, not what he does, and that's the real issue. People don't like Jake Paul the person, so they pretend he's breaking rules that don't exist when in reality he's just playing the game the same way everyone else does and winning while doing it, and yeah, maybe Viddal has more technical skill, more experience, more Polish, but that doesn't mean Jake is fake, it just means he's on a different part of the same road, and if anything, the fact that he's gotten this far with less time, less training, and more pressure should be respected, not dismissed, and as Viddal enters the phase of his career where he starts facing real threats like Chef Clark and beyond, maybe we'll see what he's truly made of, and maybe Jake will take that leap too, or maybe he won't and just stay in the lane of big fights and big money, and you know what, that's okay too, because boxing has room for all of it, the purists, the entertainers, the grinders, and the disruptors, and whether you like Jake or not, you can't deny that he's made people care about boxing again, and that's more than a lot of fighters can say, so stop pretending he's the only one doing things differently, because he's not, he's just doing it louder on a bigger stage and with a target on his back, and that's the truth. The game is the game, and everyone plays it the same way.